안녕하십니까. Hello, everyone.
네, 안녕하세요.
Welcome to our roundtable today. My name is Lina Koleilat. I'm joining you today from the lands of the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people, from so-called Canberra in Australia. And I would like to acknowledge first that the lands that I'm on has never been ceded and always was, always will be Aboriginal land. I would also like to welcome you all here today for joining us for this occasion. We thought, ISAC have thought about creating this roundtable to discuss a very important event that happened in 1953, which is 70 years of the signing of the Armistice Agreement. So I thought I will give some context about the Korean War very briefly. I'm sure many of you are already familiar. And then we will have our speakers do their presentations, and we will have ample time for questions and answers at the end. So I just wanted to start by something that Bruce Cummings have mentioned when describing Korean history, that nothing about the politics of the Korean Peninsula can be understood without comprehending the events around the Korean War. So the Korean War happened in the early 50s, and before that, of course, the Korean Peninsula was until from 1910 to 1945 was annexed by Japan, and in 1945 the US military government took charge of the South Korean government, or took charge of South Korea from 1945 to 1948. Often people say that 1945 meant that the Japanese flags came down while the United States flags went up. The Korean War, as we all know, has a lot of connotations and concepts from the Cold War, even though it does challenge our concept of cold. Actually, Cold War in Korea was not cold at all, with more than 5 million people casualties on all sides. And more than 20 countries involved. So United States, United Kingdom, Canada, Turkey, Australia, Philippines, Thailand, Netherlands, and many others were involved. Of course, in addition to China and Russia. And And it was during the Eisenhower period in July 1953 that the Armistice Agreement was signed. And it's very important to note that the Armistice Agreement was signed without South Korea being a signee to that agreement. So the armistice was signed to halt the war, but not to actually officially stop it. So technically, the Korean Peninsula is still divided and is still technically in war. Of course, the Korean Catholic Church have played a major role in Korea's history before the war, during the war, and continues to do that until today. So we will hear today different perspectives from our three speakers, and we will be able to ask them a lot of questions at the end if you're interested. So our first speaker is Wang Kyung-hun 선생님, Paul. Paul is a senior researcher at Uri Shinhak 연구소 in Seoul. He's the director of Asian Lay Leaders Forum and lecturer of Catholic University of Korea. And Paul will start us off with his presentation.
Thank you, Lina, and thank you, Michelle, for inviting me here, and also all of you. Thank you for your attention to Korean people, Korean history, and Korean Catholic Church. My presentation more on a short introductory presentation of Catholic Church in South Korea and in North Korea as much as I can. Okay, let me start. I will try my best not exceed the 10 minutes, but if it's too long, please, moderator, manage your time. Okay, I give my PPT. Hold on. Okay, and first one is like this. Okay, where is it? Okay, all right, and yeah, this is the picture of the Korean first Korean Catholic community in late 18th century. Korean Catholic community was founded, lay people themselves. Even 30 minutes before the Paris foreign missionary came to Korea at the time of Joseon Dynasty, the lay people themselves gathered together, study what the Catholicism mean for them, because they are yearning for a new heaven, a new earth, which means they're strong. Some theological, I mean, I forgot the terminology, but just I get back to you when I recollect it. Anyway, so they started the books from China, of course, written in Chinese. Most of them were mid-high class Confucian scholars, not high scholar. Their social status is a little bit lower, middle Confucian scholars, not much high scholar. Among whom was one of the scholar named Lee Sung-hun, who is firstly baptized in Beijing. The 5 years later of the first gathering of the Confucian scholars in 1978 and 1784, when he was baptized in Beijing. That is the kind of origination of Catholic Church in Korea. As you see in the picture, you have a lot of people wearing the thick wood around their neck, which is kind of a torture device, which is very heavy. So they cannot, move freely. And there is symbolizing the martyrs. So many people were killed because of the persecution. But because of the persecution was done not because of course, is much about their willingness to believe in God, believe in Catholicism. It was their conviction, but it was much about the wrong idea of Vatican, of Confucian culture, and so it's the Pope gave his papal bull, which banned, all the Confucian rites, like in China. So that was exactly happening in Korea. So one of scholar rejected the Confucian rite publicly. After that, a severe persecution was followed. For after 100 years, around 10,000 Catholics were killed. Many of them are lay people, including 10 French people, I guess. So as you see in the picture, there is someone who wearing this, what do you call it, this one? The one wearing the priest, like Father Park. But he's wearing also the hat. The same person in the center, here is also center, right? They were the canonized, meaning they become a saint, has become saint when Pope Francis, Pope Paul II visits Korea in 1984. He canonized 103 martyrs. So they are the first one to become saints in Korea, including 10 French missionaries and 93 Koreans. Although it started, the first Korean Catholic community started by middle high scholars, but among 93 Korean martyrs, many of them are lower classes. You see the differences, right? It started by the middle class scholars, but the martyrdom is kept by among many lay people. That is some kind of hidden history of Korean Catholic Church. And we have a very important year, 1962, when the Korean Catholic Church in South Korea has had its establishment of its hierarchical structure. So we had, establishes diocese, not apostolic prefecture, apostolic vicariate. No, we had diocese structure, 1962. And this is 3 archdioceses and 8 dioceses and so on and so forth. And more importantly, in 1970 and up until early 1990s, the Catholic Church actively participated in democratic movements, the country which most Korean people respected and supported. In the beginning of the 21st century, there were about maybe 5 million Catholics in South Korea, roughly 9% of the population. But unfortunately, after late 1990s, Catholic Church, according to me, is very much leaning into not poor people, but it's middle class above, and also has a lot of money pursuing, and many is very richer and richer, getting richer, and but on the other hand, they lost a lot of the spirit of the gospel and so on. So there were 2 important moments in the 1970s, 80s. One is the Kim Soo-hwan is cardinal. 1968, Kim Soo-hwan was made cardinal aged 46, which was very important because the church now not at the time of Japanese colonialism, Catholic Church definitely played an active collaborator, which really helped Japanese colonizers. But after Pan Kim's leadership, the church, Catholic Church, much devoted to making this country democratize and democracy and so on. Second important moment is Bishop Daniel Chi Hak-soon's arrest and put in jail, and he's sentenced to 15 years. Because of that, the CPAJ, Catholic Priest Association for Justice, was created, which is one of the great vehicles to make this country forward toward democracy. You see, everybody knows, everybody recognizes the role of a CPAJ was crucial and have been crucial for democracy up until today. That is a very important moment in modern history of Catholic Church here in Korea. Here's Bishop Chi, who was arrested, and now maybe people are happy. That means maybe he's released. You see some banners under which there are people, especially some priest costumes, wearing a priest costume. The other people who protest against military dictators and so on. Now turning to North Korea. This is what we call Changchung Church, not Changchung Catholic Church. In Korean word, Changchung Church is correct word. The terminology I used here is a confirmed one because I work as a UK reporter for more than 10 years. So at the time I confirm myself, so you can trust me regarding the terminology in English. So the church, Changchung Church, was built in 1988 in Pyongyang. It's the only church in Pyongyang, and maybe the other part of the region in North Korea. There is no other Catholic church. There's only one church, Catholic church in Pyongyang and in North Korea. Bishop Hong, I think it's Bishop Hong, right? He's the successor of Bishop Noginam. Maybe there's a wrong name. I think it's not confirmed by me. Anyway, his successor of Bishop Noginam of Pyongyang Diocese. At that time, in 1945, when Japanese, retreat from the Korea because Japanese was defeated by the Western-led alliance troops, and at the time, 3 bishops, 80 priests, and 180 monks in North Korea not only ministered to the parish, but also operate many welfare institutions for the boys and girls and students and so on and so forth. And what is inside, down below is what is inside of Changchung Church. There are faithful now praying. According to the statistics of Korean Church in 1944, the total number of believers in North Korea was around 60,000, which taking up around 30 of the total number of Catholics in Korea. So 30 is quite good, serious, and number of Catholics that time. And the 1949, Bishop Hong of Pyongyang was kidnapped. That was an important one because After that, there is no confirmation whether he's died or still alive up until 2013, when Pope Francis confirmed his death. Until that time, we just have apostolic administrator, not bishop of Pyongyang, because we didn't know whether he's still alive or not. There is no official confirmation was made until that time. Up until today, there is, you see, still, it's not a diocese of North Korean bishop, but is represented by Korean bishop, South Korean bishop, but named not bishop. I mean, bishop is bishop, but the apostolic administrator of Seoul Archdiocese, now named the Jeongsuntaek Archdiocese, Jeongsuntaek. In 1965, CBCK defined North Korea as a silent church. There's no voice and no nothing at all. And it's developed a change to the pray day for silent church to the pray day for reconciliation and unity of Korea in 1992. This is some change of a perspective of Korean Catholic Church, especially Korean Catholic hierarchy. I mean the bishops and the priests and so on. So we have the day which close to the June 25th when the Korean War broke. So from the 1965 we have a prayer day, but in the middle, 1992 to be exact, we have another name as a reconciliation and unity for Korean people. So, and also we have changed the name, also evangelization of North Korea to Reconciliation Committee of Korean People, set up in the 1999. After that, there is some other dioceses following the CBCK decision by setting up the similar committee in their own diocese, and then doing some peace campaign sometimes to support North Korean refugees, raise awareness, but more focused on the prayer. This is a very famous one because many people, especially among bishops and priests in South Korea, don't believe there are really Catholic faithful exist. So the Pope John Paul II met the North Korean couple in Rome in a ordinary audience. And then after that, they didn't return immediately. The guy, I mean the husband, studied theology in Urbano, but less than 1 year, he just came back. We don't know why, but anyway, officially they are genuinely Catholic couples met by Pope John Paul II. And the priest standing behind is Chang-ik, who was the first celebrator for Mass in Changchung Church in 1988. 1988 was same year when the North Korean and Roman Catholics Association, KRCA, was founded. That was a very important one. It still exists, but not as active as before. Chang Jae-eun is president of KRCA a long time. Once he came to Korea, because of there was some exchange between Korean and North and South Korea, but the Korean Catholic, the bishops or leaders didn't want to meet him. He was so sad at the time. The KRCA published some 2 books and catechism and prayer books. So I can see the, okay, sorry. North Korean Catholics have practiced their religious life. I want to put, highlight by yellow because it's, to me is important. North Korean Catholics have practiced their religious life. In Changchung Church, there are the Catholics, the faithfuls are there. But KRCA is a little bit different. It's just more on like politics. And sometimes they do religious activity at the same time. And so we need to be careful to discern what is difference between the KRCA and the Changchung Church. So are they genuine Catholic? Yes. So Vatican need to develop the providing not only provide aid to North Korea, but also some concrete policy to make development of the relationship with the Vatican. At the same time, the South Korean local Catholic Church need to, especially hierarchy, has to acknowledge North Korean Catholic genuinely exist and encourage exchange like before. 1990s, the two churches, so that the two churches, the relationship of two churches will be better developed than before. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Hwang Sang-in, for this very, overview of the history of Catholicism in Korea. There's a lot to unpack in there, and there's a lot in the presentation that we could discuss later in the Q&A. I'm gonna now introduce Park Shin-bo-nim. So Park Shin-bo-nim was born Francis Buchmeyer. Sorry
Buchmeyer.
Buchmeyer. And his name now is Munsu Park, since he took Korean citizenship in 1985. He's a retired Jesuit priest, a sociologist, and involved in the urban poor movement. Park Shin-bo-nim, to you.
Okay, I can follow up, Paul Hwang. He ended with his opinion and very strongly, an opinion with strong backing of how the church in North Korea and South Korea should keep up their meetings. I am here put into this job by the Koreans who have been leaders in reconciliation movement in the Catholic Church. That's because I recently wrote an article about Catholic efforts for North-South reconciliation, which will soon be published in the Jesuit journal, La Civiltà Cattolica. Because I wrote that, they asked me to take this up, and also because they didn't want to show up here and talk English. So this is my presentation on present efforts of the Catholic Church, but also some Christian references I've included for reconciliation on the Korean Peninsula. So next slide, please. The theological background for the efforts for reconciliation are well described in Fratelli Tutti, the encyclical by Pope Francis, beginning with love of neighbor, leading this to a decisive commitment to devising effective means to join together in initiating social processes of fraternity and justice for all, could be called political charity. And there's a need for this practice of political charity by Catholics and all Christians, because many of the leaders are not really taking up issues that they should be. So there's really a need for civil society to step in, and this is not the joining of politics and religion. This is a real call from God to love neighbor in a practical way, even involving politics. Next slide, please. The background to our reconciliation efforts are not just the Korean War, but the Northeast Asia militarization is going on and a new Cold War. You know, the SIPRI, the Swedish investigation unit that is counting up the amount of money countries are spending on military, they have included all the main countries bordering the Korean Peninsula among the top 10 militarized countries in the world. So only North Korea doesn't join that group, which is why they want to have nuclear weapons. So Pope Francis goes on to say, there is need to ensure the uncontested rule of law and tireless recourse to negotiation, mediation, and arbitration, as proposed by the Charter of the United Nations, which constitutes truly a fundamental judicial norm. Really, the hegemony and new Cold War rivalry between the US and China has no place in our present world in its situation. That's why Pope Francis says we are in a piecemeal World War III at the time, and this is a real serious crisis. Next slide, please. When Pope John Paul II visited Korea in 1984, he encouraged South Korea to become more engaged in evangelization of the North. So this became a new ideal for the Catholic Church in South Korea. And before too long, it became very clear that evangelization and the reconciliation of North and South are really inseparable. So the idea of political charity brings up all these different actions for reconciliation, love of neighbor among North and South Koreas, prayers for reconciliation, repentance, peace, and unity, interreligious dialogue and cooperation, research and education on reconciliation and peace, national and international coalitions for peace and reconciliation, civil action demanding negotiation and peace treaties, a peace treaty to end the Korean War, keeping a watch on possible diplomatic breakthroughs. So all these things are going on in the reconciliation efforts of the Catholic and Christian churches here in Korea. And I will present some of them in the following slides. The next slide, please. The concept of love of neighbor, North and South Korea. At the present time, our unification ministry is not allowing South Koreans to get in touch with North Koreans. And North Korea is also not open to communication. So a way of meeting North Koreans is meeting North Koreans who have sought asylum in the South. When they do get into a position where they can request asylum, they are first put in a facility in which they are investigated. I said 2 months here, that's false. There's no special timeline on that, but they are investigated first. And then they spent 3 months at the Hanawan. It's a facility run by the Ministry of Unification to help them learn South Korean culture and ways of acting and being, and so that they can be more adapted when they move out of the Hanawan. And when they finish the 3 months, they get help from local government for residence, education that might be needed, and finding jobs. It's an area where many civil society and religious people can get involved with North Koreans. So Sister Oh Hae Jung, who has been very active in that, has told me that there really aren't enough people who see the value of this. And actually, the North Koreans living in the South have a great deal of difficulty adapting to South Korea. It's the competition in everything. Whereas North Korea, rather than competition, it's all mobilization, mobilized as one community. So this is one part of North-South love of neighbor. Another part are Christians who have been living as practicing Christians in North Korea. Paul Hong has already introduced the Catholic Church there, the Changchun Church, and there are 2 Protestant churches also. I was very impressed by a story I have heard of Stephen Yoon, who's a South Korean by birth, who married the daughter of a Presbyterian, I believe, of a minister, American minister in South Korea. And that daughter has a mission to live in North Korea. So when Stephen Yoon became a US citizen, he was able to get to North Korea and to live as a chiropractor. He has spent a lot of time rehabilitating severely handicapped young children and even babies to bring them to where they can actually gain a certain amount of independent living. There's communities working behind that, and I give the site there, the Ignace community. So next slide, please. The Uijeongbu Diocese has been the most active diocese in efforts for reconciliation of North and South. The ordinary of the diocese, Bishop Lee Gi-hun, is a native of North Korea and still has relatives there. So he was able to raise funds and also to get a rather large aid in building this Peace and Unity Center. So it's only about 20 kilometers from the North Korean border. So when the border opens up, it will be a real nearby place to facilitate reconciliation activities. Some of the things that go on there are masses and prayers for repentance, peace, and unity. They sponsor walks in the demilitarized zone several times per year. At least once a year, or maybe twice, they will go to the place where North Korean soldiers who have been discovered in various places around South Korea, but are unidentified and have no identification. So they have been buried in a certain place fairly close to the North Korean border. So the diocese will go there a few times a year and remember the souls of these soldiers in a mass. So their brief description is given down here below. You can all read it. And you can even see the site pu2046.kr. There's an English and Japanese section to their homepage. Next, please. On the same grounds as the Catholic Institute of Northeast Asia Peace, SINAP, and the Uijeongbu Diocese Reconciliation Committee is in the city of Uijeongbu, a different place, but the director of both of those is Father Kang Ju-suk, who's pictured here. So this SINAP is doing peace theology, peace spirituality, on the reality of the Korean Peninsula, research on the relationship between religions and socialism. They have published The Road to Peace, a textbook on peace and reconciliation, which can be used in the parishes for education. They have sponsored forums and conferences. And they carry out reconciliation education for parish groups. There are such reconciliation committees in each of the dioceses of South Korea. And they all are involved in reconciliation education for parish groups, plus cooperation in these other activities. Next slide, please. At the Catholic Korea Peace Forum 2022, which was held at Catholic U in Washington, D.C., was an opportunity for Korean bishops to try to influence U.S. policy toward Northeast Asia. So 4 Korean bishops, including the one I mentioned, Bishop Igi-han, met with 4 U.S. bishops who are of the Justice and Peace Committee of the U.S. Bishops' Conference. The Korean bishops criticized the negotiate from strength position of the U.S. and its reliance on sanctions. But the U.S. bishops said, well, for brother bishops, we should remain in unity with them and try to help them influence the Congress. So they arranged meetings with members of the U.S. State Department and also with members of the U.S. Congress. I see my 15 minutes is up. I'll go ahead and finish up quickly. Next slide. I have just a few more things to cover. The island of Jeju-do has been named an island of peace officially by President Roh Moo-hyun. And the bishop has set up the St. Francis Peace Center there. It was founded through the efforts of those opposing the construction of the naval base on the seacoast of that village in Gangjang. If there's more time, there's very interesting stories behind that. Lena knows about them. So you can ask me if you're more interested. Next slide, please. So the geopolitical significance of Jeju Island. First is that in the April 3rd incident, 1948, when the Korean Army crushed an uprising against the 1948 presidential election that was excluding North Korea. So that's a massacre by the Korean Army, which is still being trying to be settled. And second, the Gangjang Naval Base, it represents cooperation with the U.S. policy of containment of China rather than actually Korea's security. And third, the center is also near the remains of a Japanese airfield that was used as a reloading point for Japan's Nanjing Massacre of 1937. So the things that go on at the St. Francis Peace Center are listed on the right. Lecture series, Understanding North Korea, Women's Role, Peace Education Retreats, etc. One more thing about the St. Francis Center is on the next slide, please. I was there when I met some of the women who made in 2015 a walk across the DMZ from North Korea into South Korea. So that drew international attention to the division of the peninsula. And some of them visited the Gangjang Naval Base opposition movement after that. So that incident of their crossing the DMZ is in a movie called Crossings, an MU film directed by Diane Morgelian. So I introduced that quickly. And finally, one more slide, a very interesting thing that in 2018 were the summits between Trump and Kim and also between President Moon and Kim Jong-un. They were going on. And following that spirit, in February of 2019, several North Koreans came to take part in an official it was a ceremony at the Church of the Lateran, very important church, in February of 2019, the 51st anniversary of the founding of Sant'Egidio. So the South Korean ambassador to the Vatican is on the right, the Honorable Lee Bang-man. So they were able to spend 10 or 20 minutes of sincere conversation. So it was a great event. And after that, it seemed to be more likely that Pope Francis might receive a invitation to North Korea. However, after the fiasco of the Hanoi summit between Kim and Trump, after that failed, all contacts with the Vatican were pretty much cut off. However, one last thing, even in this year, the president of the National Assembly of South Korea made a visit to Rome, and Cardinal Lazarus Yu told him that the Pope is still open to visiting North Korea if North Korea would invite him. So the Pope Francis visit to North Korea is still not a dead end. So that's my final statement. And anything beyond that, you can ask questions.
Thank you very much, Pakman Sushin Burnim, for this. And there's definitely a lot to talk about in the Q&A at the end. I would like to now introduce Franklin Rauch, who's received his PhD from the University of British Columbia and is an associate professor in the History and Philosophy Department at London University in Greenwood, South Carolina. His research focuses on Korean religious history, particularly Catholicism. Frank, the floor is yours.
Thank you. First of all, thank you, Michelle and Lena, for organizing this and kindly inviting me. And thank you to our the first two presenters. Kind of a hard act to follow, got me thinking, and I hope I can kind of complement them with my own remarks. So what I'm going to be focusing on is kind of the messaging that's going on about the Korean War and related issues of peace and unification by various kind of groups in the Catholic Church, kind of leaders within the Catholic Church, and looking at some the kind of the message that they're bringing out, some of the differences there, and also some of the difficult issues that they face in trying to say what they want to say. So it was interesting this year, the June 25th, which Father Huang had mentioned, that's the day the war began, and that's the day that there's this kind of peace and reconciliation prayers that actually did happen on a Sunday this year. And Archbishop Jong gave a homily at Myeongdong Cathedral, and you'll notice, as Father Huang also said, notice he's not only the in charge of Seoul Archdiocese, he's also the administrator in Pyongyang. But he talks about this issue of reconciliation, right? So June 25th, day the war begins, we have division, now we need reconciliation. And he's emphasizing on this importance of forgiveness. And that was, of course, a big part of reconciliation, is to forgive. But it's interesting because he talks about how we can't let the memories of the past, the wound memories of pain in the past, dominate our future. And what he says, I think, is quite right, but it's a difficult balancing act, right? How do you remember the past without letting it control your future, right? And I think that's a difficulty that's happening here, and something that has to engage in some very deep historical reflection. And the Archbishop continued to talk about how it's not by threatening through weapons that we're going to be able to bring this kind of reconciliation, but we really need to bring a kind of trust with each other. This is what we need to do if we're going to do all this. And this also brings up this other issues. How do you build this trust, right? And trust is a big part, of course, of this forgiveness, of this reconciliation. But then there's also this kind of question of who is asking for forgiveness and for what, right? Who is asking for forgiveness and for what? And that's an issue in this kind of messaging. I'm not quite seeing that, and that's going to be a difficult point, I think. And it was interesting, of course, the poster that was put together for advertising this roundtable was an image of the Korean Peace Appeal organization. This is another image I found of them. This is from a June 2023 Hun Kilray article. And I thought it was interesting because you can see even though it's not, it's not an officially, it's not a Catholic group per se, though the Catholics are represented in it. You can see two nuns here, and one has a sign that says, peace movement, but also there's this idea of that peace will help bring, it is connected to unification, right? There's an argument which should come first, but you can see that there with the unified Korea. And what's also interesting here is this nun has a poster that says that the tensions in East Asia, or there's growing tensions in East Asia, and so that the Korean, American, Japanese kind of military cooperation needs to stop, right? So that's an understanding of how peace should work. And so it kind of follows, well, we got into this mess because of a war. We're going to get out of this mess by bringing peace, right? And what's the threat to peace? Here, it's this South Korean, American, and Japanese military cooperation. And you can see down here, there's a lot of other ideas that are there. So this whole thing with the Korean War touches on so many different ideas and so many different policies. It's really hard to stay focused, but I'll do my best. And here's another, this is from a Catholic broadcasting, Pyeonghwa Bangsong in Korean. There you can see there's the, Wujong Gu, which was mentioned by our earlier presenters as being very important in these movements. But here you can see another idea here. It says that the joint military operations need to stop between the United States and Korea in order to bring a kind of reconciliation. And this, of course, is connected to this idea that it's been 70 years since the armistice. We need to finally have some sort of peace. So this is, and like I say, this is on the kind of it's quasi-official Catholic news. So this is very important. These kinds of ideas are being sent out, and this, of course, all happens around June 25th. And what's interesting is there was a lot of preparation being done for this, and this is there was a series put out by the Korean Catholic Bishops Conference on YouTube, and I think it's like 10 lessons on how to become kind of a supporter of peace, right? How you can, it's for lay people to learn how to work for peace and reconciliation. And that can mean a lot of different things, but I think this image in particular from the first episode makes it very clear. I'm sorry, it's not the first episode, but this image makes it clear that a part of this peace and reconciliation is this idea of unification, right? And then of course you have the dove for peace. And what's interesting, so I watched some of this, and in the first episode, they talk about what is peace, and they talk about what isn't peace. And I thought it was very interesting because they talk about the Roman peace. And what is the Roman peace? It is the peace in which the strong rule and the weak cannot resist the strong, right? That's what it is. And it's a peace brought by soldiers, by weapons, and things like that. And I wonder if they're drinking from the same well, right? Because you've got this idea here, and then you've got this poster here, right? It's a very similar kind of idea, and a understanding of how the world works and how we have peace and so forth. And this Roman peace, which I think is being compared to the like American, Japanese, South Korean militaries, is compared then to the peace of this other kind of peace, what is presented in the video as true peace, which is the peace of Christ, which is Jesus's peace, and traditional Jewish notions of shalom, which I thought was very striking. But this was something that was designed to be shown to like parish groups. And there's a book that the Catholic Bishops Conference put out that this was meant to kind of guide people through. So there's this effort to kind of share this message, a certain particular understanding of how all this works with lay people. And also from another episode, from the sixth episode, it went over the kind of history of peace and reconciliation, and unfortunately the division that led to it. And one thing I thought was really striking was how it presented, first of all, the church, the Catholic Church is presented here as lamenting division, as praying for division to end. And a lot of what Father Huang talked about, like this development and how they talked about prayer and ideas, reconciliation meetings, they covered that in that video. And so that was interesting because there's this idea to present the Catholic Church as this kind of source of unity as lamenting the division and praying to help end it. What I thought, though, was also really striking is that it just says, the video just basically says, well, the United States and the Soviet Union divided up Korea. And there's a lot of truth to that, but there's not really anything said about internal Korean divisions. There were real arguments among Korean people about what a unified Korea after liberation should look like, right? There were real divisions about what kind of government, what kind of society they should have. And it is kind of a difficult issue if you're going to talk about reconciliation and talk about forgiveness. Well, what are the things that you're trying to reconcile, right? So I'm not trying to say that, I mean, that there's some, this is accurate in a sense, but it's missing some of the internal divisions. And I think that makes it more difficult to have peace and reconciliation. To be fair, it's a 6-minute video. Now, at the same time, though, there is some acknowledgement of some of these difficult issues, right? About what I've been saying about, you know, well, what do you forgive? Who does the forgiving? Because they mention when the North Korean army invades, they round up and they kill a lot of people, including a large number of Catholics, right? And here we have, you know, the damage caused by the communist army, right? Is that something that, in order to have peace and reconciliation, does North Korea have to apologize for that, right? Is that, or is this something, is this history going to be forgotten? Right? It's a tricky thing. Now, to kind of shift over to back to the Byunghwa Bangsong, the Peace Broadcasting Channel, they did a very long news program on June 25th, and this is just an excerpt from it, but it raised some very interesting and, again, some kind of difficult questions in how to actually talk about these things. And so here in talking, it says flat out, North Korea invades the South, right, on June 25th. And then the next, very next segment talks about the damage caused by the war, by the number of people killed, the number of refugees, the number of widows. But one thing I think is really striking is the focus on war orphans, right? The focus on war orphans. And it goes on to emphasize here, and you can see the time stamps, it's you know, we're moving very quickly, but then it talks about the Hungnam evacuation, the so-called Christmas miracle. And if you're not familiar with this, when after China intervened, a large number of refugees were withdrawn by ROK and American forces to the south to kind of rescue them from possibly being harmed. So this is very important for one thing for Catholics, because one of the important ships that helped bring over thousands of refugees was the Meredith Victory, which was an American ship captained by a very devout Catholic who would, after the war, become a monk. I think he became Benedictine, but that is certainly, that's a part of the war, right? That presents the United States in a positive way, right? So above here, we have this idea, you know, the United States here in this poster, United States here in this poster, they're causing problems through their kind of military technology. The bishop emphasizes I'm sorry, I'm trying to point the screen, but you can't see me point. You know, we need to stay away from these weapons, but here we have, right, military technology saving people and the United States playing a positive role. So there's these complex kind of memories. And then there's also talking about the airlifting of children into to Jeju, which again is carried out by the US Air Force, the same US Air Force that's bombing North Korea very, very heavily, right? So there's a whole bunch of stuff going on here, a whole bunch of complex memories. And this goes again, you know, who asked for forgiveness and forgiveness for what? And what's interesting, though, is that instead of pushing it in that direction, which would be very awkward, what instead the video does is it focuses on what's happening in Ukraine and about children who are being kidnapped into Russia in Ukraine. And it ends with a question, but no answer in a sense. And I need to look at the larger video, but it has the children saying, you know, we don't understand war. What is this war for? Why are we fighting? And it doesn't answer those questions either for the war in Ukraine or the Korean War. And again, it's that kind of historical questions that I think are important in thinking about how peace and reconciliation works. These things happen. Well, why did they happen? And why did they continue to happen? And there's the Meredith Victory. There's a picture right up there. This is an American priest who wrote about the Meredith Victory. But in the Hanguk Kyoisa Yonguso, the Korean Church History Institute, they put out like a newsletter. I've got some copies here. There you go. But there they present the war. Oftentimes, the United States is having a very positive influence, right? So there's this kind of question again. The war brings up issues of, is the alliance for U.S. good or bad, right? I'm sorry, is it the U.S.-Korea alliance good for Korea or bad for Korea? And this article in that Hanguk Kyoisa Yonguso, it looks at human rights abuses in North Korea. It talks about a lot of the problems in North Korean society. And again, if you're going to have reconciliation, that's kind of a difficult issue. How do you reconcile an authoritarian, totalitarian regime with one dedicated to human rights and liberal democracy, right? That's not an easy thing to do, right? It's very difficult to do. And I wanted to highlight this. This is, there you can see the Committee for the Reconciliation of the Korean People. They did a lot of different activities. They're going to do July 27th. That's when they're commemorating or I don't know if commemoration is the right word, but they're reflecting on the armistice. They also had a symposium, and you can see the symposium there. That's all on YouTube if you're interested to hear the kind of views, how people are understanding this. And they also had a novena, right? 9 days of prayer. And I want to, yeah, there you can see Myeongdong Songdong. They were supporting this. There you can see number one, it talks about how they're going to have this mass, but number two, they have a second collection. But they also have the novena, right? That they're going to say the novena there. And there's an example of some of the prayers that are a part of the novena. And so Catholics were highly encouraged to pray this novena. And of course, there's different prayers for each day, right? And it culminates in this kind of prayer that the war will completely end and we'll have peace on June 25th. You can see it's all very nicely laid out there to try and get people to pray for this. There's this idea that spirituality is going to help overcome these difficulties, right? I mentioned a lot of difficulties. Hopefully this will help it overcome it. And this is an excerpt. This was printed in the Daegu Bulletin, right? The bulletins are done by diocese. This comes from the Daegu Bulletin. And so this would make it very easy because everyone can pray it together in church if that's what the pastor wants to do that day. And there again is the Daegu Bulletin. And both I looked at the Daegu and Seoul bulletins. These are the bulletins you get every week if you go to Mass, and both of them had the lead column was talking about this idea of how do we bring about reconciliation and talk about the importance of prayer in doing so and bringing together biblical ideas and biblical themes. And I want to end, so there's different, like all these dioceses have their own bulletins. I think Daegu maybe has the best bulletin because it has a comic, right? It has a comic strip that's put out every week. And I thought this week, the comic strip for that week, the June 25th week, was very interesting because it starts out with let us gather our hearts. And this man says, if we focus our heart and we ask God, he will do anything for us. And then the protagonist, the hero, says, yeah, that's correct. But if it's better than just being alone, you should gather together, and then God will certainly hear what you are asking for. And then it ends with the we want unity and reconciliation for the nation, and it's remembering that day. And I think it's very interesting because the comic is emphasizing the importance of spirituality. It says we need to come together and pray. That will help us to end national division, bring national unity, bring reconciliation. But there's also, so there's that, we'll bring unity that way. But I think there's also this implication, hey, if we get all Koreans together, then God will hear us even better, right? So then post-unification ideas. So that is my time. So I will stop there and I look forward to your questions. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Frank. I do have a lot of questions for all the speakers myself, but I would like to open it up first for the audience. If you'd like to put your hand up, or you could also type your questions in the chat. I'm happy to read them out for the panel. I'll just give it a second. Otherwise, I will start with my own questions. All right, maybe let's do that. So I wanted to ask all three speakers, it was really good overview of listening first about the history of Catholicism in Korea and listening more into what is happening at the moment on the Korean Peninsula in regards to reunification from the perspective of the church, both from Frank and Park Mun-soo Shinbunim. I was just wondering, most of the political events that happened between North and South, where people were having a lot of hope about reunification, happened under President Moon Jae-in, who is himself a Catholic. So I was wondering if the speakers would like to reflect a little bit on the role of Moon Jae-in in helping, or maybe actually the opposite, of not helping the reunification efforts, and what was his role as a Catholic president and his influence in regards to being a Catholic president in that sense. Who would like to jump in first? Park Mun-soo Shinbunim, we can't hear you.
Someone cut me off. Okay, I'm on.
Go ahead.
I was suggesting that Paul Hwang probably will have the best answer for that. He's not coming right out. I'll give one short sentence. That is, when Moon Jae-in was president, he really made a strong effort to be president for all the people of South Korea. So he didn't identify himself as a Catholic. People knew he was Catholic and he didn't deny it, but I think he distinguished his role as president for all the people and his living the faith. He was living the faith by doing his job as president in a charitable way. My opinion.
Hwang Sung-Nim, would you like to jump in?
I don't know much about Catholic faith or religious conviction of presidents, like all the way from Kim Dae-jung to Roh Moo-hyun to Moon Jae-in. I don't know how much the Catholic faith influence or have some impact to their political decision or policies. But it is for sure that the Kim Dae-jung and Roh Moo-hyun, indeed, he also has his baptismal name as Catholic. But like what Father Park Mun-soo, he also didn't identify himself as Catholic. Even if he was so, there's not much difference to be made. Yeah, to me, it's also quite a historical meeting between Moon Jae-in and Kim Jong-un. Was quite successful. We very much expected from then on there should be something follow-up. But unfortunately, we have now a miserable administrations. I don't want to mouse his even name, but anyway, all now is that being destroyed. So it's and we quite regret that such a sunshine policy succeed to the his successor like Roh Moo-hyun and Moon Jae-in, but now is facing quite opposite. Like what Frank showed us with the pictures. Some sisters really, the Catholic nuns joining the protest against some kind of military exercise, the provocative military exercises between, the U.S. Army and South Koreans. It's many things going backward, but especially when it comes to military or foreign relationships with other countries or military policy and attitude toward North Korea. Yeah, that's the place where we are in.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
I will read. I had a few more questions, but I'll read. There's a few questions in the chat. The Association of Pittsburgh Priests. I'm sorry, I don't know what your name is. Would you like to read the question yourself, or would you like me to read it?
Sure, I can read it. It's what I'm interested in the relationship of the political parties on unification and their support vis-a-vis the Catholic population for its internal politics. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And there's another comment in the chat as well from Kim Jong-sun saying that Moon's policy is a different issue from the unification effort. Kim Sang-nim, would you like to jump in and elaborate on that, or we could leave it to the panel to comment on both questions?
I would like to hear the panel's opinions first, and then I can express my opinions as well.
Okay, great, thank you. Frank, would you like to start first this time?
I actually don't have a comment to make on that. I apologize. I can maybe jump in later, but I don't think I have anything fruitful to say. Being a historian, I tend to think a little. What was it? That's still fairly recent.
Fair enough, Frank. Thank you.
I can maybe jump in later.
박문수 신부님.
I'm afraid I don't understand the what's being said here. Moon's policy is a different issue from the unification effort. I'm not sure what the author means, which part of Moon's policy and what aspects of unification effort. So, there are very clear differences between Moon's policy regarding relations with North Korea and the policies of Park Geun-hye, who went before, and Yoon Suk-yeol, who has followed. Yes. So I don't see how they are different issues. They're all intertwined. But anyhow, yes.
Shimbunim, would you like to answer the first question? Yeah, as well.
Oh, the first question is a very good question. And it would, for a good answer, it would require some research. I'll give my off-the-cuff answer. The Catholic population is quite divided on issues of unification. As Father Kang Ju-suk mentioned to me, their efforts to give parish education on reconciliation. In some parishes, it's not well received because the people are sort of anti-North Korea and are not ready to hear about reconciliation. And other parishes, they would be better received. So the Catholic population is quite divided on these issues. And I think that my own impression is that Catholics have their political issues regarding the US or North Korea or unification coming from different sources than their Catholic religion. So their source of their position on unification is going to be different from the what the bishops say or what the bishops are suggesting regarding prayers. So in the same way, some Catholics would be pro the present government party, and other Catholics would be strongly opposed to it. So,
Thank you.
yeah. There's no clear answer for that.
Thank you, Shimbunim.
Mhm.
Kim Jong-sun, Sonsengnim, would you like to jump in and clarify your question or comment?
Yeah, and first, and I would like to clarify that my question was that, and we need to think about and what perspectives we need to discuss about the government policy to see the unification issues in Korean Peninsula. And there are two perspectives from my perspective. And first one is the long-term perspectives to see the parallel exist of North and South Korean government in Korean Peninsula. And then this peninsula, this perspective allows us to think about how we can identify, we can find a common area that give common beneficiary to North and South Korea government. And the second one is that, and second perspective I understood is that, and the approach to think about the eventual unification of South and North Korea. And that include, that approach allowed to us how to unify our two governments in Korean Peninsula. But first to think, do I need to stop to get any questions? If you
No,
have
go
any
ahead.
questions. Yeah. And I think Moon Jae-in government's policy took the first perspective. They said peace first and mutual respect and open policy. So do you might remember that North Korean defectors and were sent back to North Korea under the Moon Jae-in's government. So I think we need to discuss the what the approach Moon Jae-in's government took to see the unification first, and then think about his role and Bishop's role in unification policy and unification impacts on the unification policies in Korean Peninsula. That's my question.
Great, thank you, Kim Sonsengnim. Before we move to the panel, I might read the question in the chat. There's another question from Richard. Richard is asking, in the years up till the armistice, what kind of socioeconomic profile would Catholics in South Korea and North Korea have, would you say? Surely this was diverse, urban, rural, tenants, cultivators, owners, etc. And the second question is, how affected were Catholics in North Korea by the 1946 Land Reform Act, greatly or minimally? I'll just open it to the panel to comment on Kim Sonseng-nim's question and Richard's question in the chat.
I'll speak for myself first, that the question is very good and asking very specific material about Catholics in South Korea and North Korea, and at a particular time in history. And I must confess that in my study of sociology, it's been all focused on national development in South Korea. And I have never studied the situation in Korea, say before the war and during the war and right after. So I really don't know the answer to that question.
Wang Something, would you like to jump in? Frank?
Yeah. So first, just in general, during the colonial period and after, Korea was very, very poor. Most of the people were living in the countryside. There was, especially in the 1930s, with the Japanese growing militarism and invasion of China, you had growing urbanization because there was growing industrialization. They started moving a lot of factories to Korea. So there was that kind of general trend. Poor urban, or I'm sorry, poor rural country. Tendency did go up. The game was kind of rigged against peasants. That's one reason why you get a slowly developing communist movement in Korea. But you've got the growing. You've got a lot of peasants who are having a really hard time. There's a bit of a safety valve in this. You can go get factory jobs, but there's kind of limits to that. So it's a very poor community in many respects. But in some ways, it was also a very upwardly mobile community. So like, it's interesting to read stories from the missionaries like that were working there in the 20s and 30s, talking about how like they would have a school that was basically just a room with a chalkboard, and they couldn't prevent, they would get hundreds of applicants. They couldn't all get in that room, right? Like there was just this big desire for education that the Catholic Church could offer. And a lot of those people would become Catholic and so forth. So you have this kind of group there's an upwardly mobile segment, but theologically, there's also this sense that we need to stay apart from the world. The world's kind of dangerous and bad and threatening, and we need to stay isolated in order to preserve our faith as much as possible. So you've got these kind of general trends of ghetto church in the countryside, local focused communities that are otherworldly, but then you've also got Catholics who are intellectuals. You have some intellectuals who were not Catholic who become Catholic. So you've got lots of interesting things going on. And I should probably stop there. I hope that answered, or at least gave some sense of an answer.
Thank you very much, Frank.
I'm sorry. In terms of the North Korean, the Land Reform Act, they would have lost all their land, all the church and the monasteries. There was a big Benedictine monastery up north. They would have lost it all.
Thank you. I might just open it up. I know there's another question in the chat, but it's not really related to the topic. So I might, if anyone, Michelle, you're unmuted. Would you like to ask a question?
Yes. So I was in Daegu like 10 days ago, and I took the time to do the tour, the historical tour downtown. And it was a wonderful reminder how Protestant Korean and Catholic Koreans have a very different historiography and compete to show how they each love the country through different historical narratives. So the Catholics emphasize on all the martyrs before the Japanese period and don't talk too much about what happened during the Japanese colonization with the French priest who called for support to the Japanese project. So that's, we never hear about it. And the Protestant on the other side emphasize on all the things they did during the Japanese empire to fight back and to promote education and independence. Anyway, so these things, this background brings my question. Sorry, it's that we frame the conversation in like in the binary relationship between the North and the South, of course, with the US in the background. But I would say, what about the relationship to Protestants in general and Japan also in this effort to find a peaceful solution for whatever the political solution will be for the Korean Peninsula? We heard a few things, but maybe you may have more comments about how Protestants, especially Protestants, are impacting directly or indirectly the ways in which Catholics position themselves in this effort to find a solution on one hand, but also same question with Japanese relationship with Japan. Recently, we had Korean priests, I saw, which we went to Japan and we really worked at also trying to reconcile and improve relationship with Japan. So anyway.
Thank you, Michelle.
it's half a comment, half a question, but
Mhm.
I just think Protestants are important piece in
Of course.
the conversation, especially in Korea. So I would love to hear your reaction on that, and the ghost of Japan as well. It's not just the US.
Who would like to start?
I have just a couple quick things to say, especially because they involve two audience members. There is some emphasis among Korean Catholics about resistance to Japan. Dr. Ji-Yoon Han and I, she's announced, we translated a Korean Catholic nationalist writings on Chung-gun, and he's a Korean national hero because he killed a Japanese national hero, Ito Hirobumi, who was in charge of colonizing Korea. So Catholics also in Korea also often emphasize that. After 1910, right, we don't see as much. And I've had Korean Catholic priests lament to me that there was no Korean Catholic signer of the March 1st Declaration of Independence, right? There was, I think, 17 Protestants, 16 Chondokyo, and 2 Buddhist monks, but no Catholic priests. But there is this kind of memory. It's a rather violent one, and that sometimes I think limits it somewhat. What's interesting in terms of reconciliation, right? Again, to kind of broaden this question, it's not only what are we reconciling about, who's asking forgiveness, who do we reconcile with? Dr. Hae-Sung Park and we recently put together an article about Dr. Nagai Takashi, who, if you're not familiar with him, he was a Japanese medical doctor who his wife was killed in the Nagasaki bomb blast, and he helped lead a lot of the efforts to help people after the atomic bombing of Nagasaki. And he was a convert to Catholicism. His wife was from an old Catholic family from like the 17th century. And what was interesting is a lot of Koreans have translated his books into Korean. And there's a lot going on there because it brings together a lot of diverse groups. Some are people who are secular, who just like Japanese culture and want Korea and Japan to get together in a more pleasant way. Others are very concerned about nuclear issues. Right. And of course, Nagai Takashi had a lot to say about nuclear weapons, though he was much more positive towards nuclear power and things like that, very much anti-nuclear weapon. And so it creates this complex relationship because, of course, the background to issues between North and South Korea today a lot of times revolve around nuclear weapons. Right. I think that was one kind of question was, should South Korea get nuclear weapons? And so it's interesting, this Japanese person, who, by the way, I should point, Nagai Takashi was in the Imperial Army. He was a doctor, but he was in China. That raises some interesting alliance because you can have Korean and Japanese anti-nuclear activists come together, and a lot of them are probably also not going to be too fond of Japanese remilitarization either. So it's a complex pot of stew, so to say.
Thank you, Frank. Shimbuni, would you like to add anything?
Well, I could give good examples of what Frank said about cooperation between Japanese and Koreans in opposing nuclear weapons and nuclear power stations. I was involved with the Japanese Jesuits and Japanese demonstrators on many occasions, both demonstrating both in Korea and in Japan. And in that case, there is very little feeling of otherness between Japanese and Koreans who are sharing the same, say, social movement. Yeah, so the social movement overcomes the otherness. And for people who have had that experience, they will have a very different view. Koreans, very different type of view of Japan, and Japanese will have a very different type of view of Korea. I would also, the JM said a question, if defectors from North Korea are having a difficult time adapting to the severe competition of capitalism, what might we learn from them? So I had a good 2-hour talk with Sister Oh Hae-jung, who has spent many, many hours over many years being friends with North Koreans who are in South Korea and their difficult time. And what she's discovering is that they require understanding because they have a very different background. And what might we learn? We can learn that in South Korea also, there are people with very different backgrounds and people who are very much injured by the intense competition. And we can learn that it takes understanding and closeness and friendship, and that there should be a friendship side to welfare programs to overcome the severe competition of capitalism.
Thank you, Shimbunim. That's a beautiful note to end on. Thank you very much to our panel presenters, and thank you everyone who joined us today. I hope you found the presentations interesting, enlightening, and thank you. Have a great evening.
Okay, good work, Lena. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mhm.